All right. Special Education Interviews, Module 3, EDL 850 by Steve Wallace. I did this once and went over my 15-minute free limit, so I might talk kind of fast through some of this. The three people that I interviewed, the administrator has been an assistant principal for quite a few years now, first in Indiana, and then at a 5A school in Kansas, and is going to be a first-year head principal at a 4A school in Kansas this year. The SPED teacher that I interviewed is a SPED teacher for K through 12 in just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. She is my sister-in-law. And the paraprofessional that I interviewed was actually an assistant coach with me that was a para in a 5A school in Kansas. So the first question, child find procedures. I'll start with the paraprofessional. He was not involved in this process at all, and he could not help me answer this question because he had no training on it. Now I'm going to go back over to the administrator because this is more specific to Kansas, which is where I'm at. And she said the normal protocol would be a teacher talk to the counselor talk to the school psych. Then they had a meeting with all parties. They would observe the student. They would then come up with a 6-week intervention. That 6-week intervention is required by law. At this point, some administrations, which they did, would involve the parents and let them know. Some administrations do not. The observations would continue with check-ins on the supports and interventions that were put in place to see if they were working. If after that 6 weeks they still were not working, they would then test the students for identified needs. The only way that you don't go through that 6-week process of interventions is if the parent requests testing. The SPED teacher, similar process, wasn't quite as specific as far as the weeks and the interventions, but they have what they call the RTI process. Teachers flag students who are doing below the norm, then interventions are put in place. They use a STAR test to screen students for reading and math, and they also use another standardized test that they get annual data back and they compare data each year, and that includes gen ed teachers looking at those scores as well. Most challenging part, the administrator. Now this administrator was a SPED teacher, so does have a background in SPED, which is, like she said, sometimes unusual to find administrators with SPED backgrounds. But getting people to understand the significance of SPED, the importance of it, including and especially those IEP meetings, using everybody's time wisely in those meetings because they know they can go long. She understands that everybody has other things to do, but the school needs to value that, especially all teachers and all staff. The SPED teacher said that in her current position, SPED is not made a priority and admin does not support it, which then filters down to the gen ed teachers, and they kind of see SPED teachers as second rate and do not follow the guidelines of the IEPs. This is unique. Her previous school, the hardest part that she had was just time. Being able to manage all the caseloads, getting in and making sure gen ed teachers were following the IEPs and that sort of thing, just never felt like they had time in the day. And then the paraprofessional, he just found that, he was kind of considered, he wasn't the teacher in the classroom. So sometimes he had to ask that teacher for a little help as far as making sure the kid was doing what they were supposed to be doing. Dealing with behaviors, some of the students from a day-to-day basis, you didn't know what challenges you were going to face and didn't really know how to handle it. You're just thrown in the fire with very little training. Felt like there could be a lot more training that paras go through. Most rewarding part of the job, I'm going to make this one quick. I know there's a lot of writing on this page, but basically what it came down to is seeing kids be successful because of the accommodations, modifications, supports that these SPED students had. When they are successfully academically, they're at grade level or above, they pass a test they've been working hard for, they have those little moments of getting it, they get a math problem, are able to move on to the next one. And also emotionally and behaviorally growing up and being able to eventually academically, emotionally, behaviorally kind of move away from the combinations and modifications because they have been able to grow from those throughout. What advice do they have for supervision of special education staff, including paraspeech pathologists and so on? Administrator, I thought, had good advice, which was you need a department chair or a leader in the SPED department that you can trust and rely on them, and they are the leader of the SPED department. You don't have to micromanage the group. You need to be involved with them. You need to support them, and you need to allow them, you need to listen to them and allow them to talk about what things they need and then try to help support them. SPED teacher would like to see a systematic accountability measures put in place for general education teachers. Nothing overbearing, but something that shows that they are following IEPs, and if they're not, there's some things in place to make sure that they begin to do so. And also the supervisor, the principal, don't be afraid to ask if you don't know something. Ask, and ask for help if you need help with something when it comes to SPED. And then the paraprofessional just said, make sure the paras feel a part of the process, check in with them, offer more training to them. Now that checking in with them I thought was really cool because he said that a para has a little different relationship with the student. Students are a little more willing to talk to paras than they are even like their general ed teacher about different things going on in their life or whatnot. So it's good to check in with a para because they know a lot about those kids, maybe even more than the gen ed teachers. How do you effectively work with parents? The para actually had little to no contact with parents, so I'm going to leave him out of this, but the admin and the SPED teacher basically said the same thing. It starts with communication. Having a communication plan of when and what communication is going to happen. If they have any special needs for communication, follow through those. Be willing to listen to them. Be willing to let them vent at times, and be willing to problem solve with them so that you're working together, because it's important to never forget that the child is number one, and all parties want to make sure that that child is successful. But communication is definitely by far the key here, listening to those two talk. How do they work with gen ed teachers with students with special needs? The administrator relies on the department chair or the SPED leader to let them know if there's any issues with gen ed teachers. And then they can go and observe and have discussions one-on-one with that specific teacher. She will also kind of do a broad talk about special ed during meetings, but likes to spend a lot of time one-on-one with gen ed teachers specifically about the needs of special education students if needed. The special ed teacher thought that a collaborative planning time of at least one time a week for 30 minutes to 1 hour is very beneficial. That's what she had at previous school, does not have that at her current school. But this is an intentional planning time where they can work together to come up with accommodation modifications and support specifically about the instruction that was going to happen that day. And then as far as the para with the gen ed teachers, he just tried to be in charge of those SPED students that were in the class. So if there was 20 kids in class, 4 of them were SPED. He tried to really bounce between those 4, answering those questions, pushing them along. And just the gen ed teacher was there for questions and clarifications that needed to be. Otherwise, he really tried to help take some of the what needed to be done with those students off that gen ed's plate as much as possible. What advice do you have for first year administrator? Start with our administrator. Get to as many IEPs as possible. Make sure you know who has IEPs and what the main topics of those IEPs. Get to know the kids. If there's a high stakes meeting that has to do with SPED, have more than one administrator in there. And then the SPED teacher, for first year administrator, ask questions. Find the best, most experienced SPED teacher, rely on them, listen to them, go to meetings with them, ask them questions, ask them what supports they need in that first year. And then the paraprofessional, just be involved, get to know the paras, get to know the kids, get to know the staff. Don't just be the disciplinarian. Be involved, be around on good days and bad days, which I thought was a good little quote. How do you describe the role of special education teacher and building principal? Administrator said this is one of the closest relationships that she has with teachers because of the extra help and extra resources that are needed with SPED students. There's unique situations that come up, could be facilities and needing handicap accessible things, could be certain school supplies that are needed. There's a lot of things that come up. You spend a lot of time talking with SPED teachers. The SPED teachers said they need a basic understanding of how SPED works, how you get in, what supports there are, how it all works. Aware of high needs cases, that could be parent issues, could be behavior issues. Certain students you need to keep an eye on retention and or academic progress to graduation. And if you don't have a SPED background, rely on your SPED leaders. And then the paraprofessional is just looking for somebody that is going to advocate and enforce what the SPED student needs. Characteristics do they seek in administrators? Very similar. Just they'd love to have somebody with a SPED background, or if not, somebody that advocates for SPED, that supports SPED, understands the importance of it, and makes it a priority, and it's not secondary or even further down, and is a part of those SPED kids' lives and in the SPED department. So my reflection, evaluation, and projection. My reflection, it was really cool to see 3 different perspectives within SPED. A few of the questions were similar, so I got kind of similar answers on those questions. In interviewing an admin with no SPED experience, I think would probably have given me even more of a different perspective, since my admin had been a SPED teacher before. If I could do it over again, I'd probably pick another one. And they're all out of school now. So I wonder what answers would have been different if they were in the thick of school, if it was October or April, what kind of answers they would have given me, because I was surprised that not a lot of parent issues were talked about during the interview. I kind of expected more talk about parents, and they really shied away from anything to talk about that. But I thought maybe if it was in the thick of the school year, there would have been maybe some different answers instead of July. Evaluation, similarities. They want a principal that's going to be involved, be willing to learn, willing to listen, be supportive, and their favorite thing is to see the kids grow. Differences, just their perspectives, what their jobs, what their roles are. Depth of knowledge. You could tell that the para was the least trained in this, just based on his answers. And then I think probably the perspective, if I had an admin that wasn't a SPED teacher previously, the perspective would have been much different. And the depth of knowledge. Roles, and then just how involved they are in the whole process of things. The para is pretty much just a classroom, and the other 2 are involved in meetings and whatnot. So what did I learn? What's my projection? Where do I need to go with this information? I need to make SPED a priority when I become an administrator. I need to let the teachers know, the SPED teachers specifically, and the gen ed teachers, that I'm very supportive and I want SPED students in the SPED department to succeed. And the same with the kids and the parents. They need to know they have an administrator that's supportive and wants them to be successful. And then I need to learn as much as I can about SPED laws, IEPs, how SPED works in general, so that I can be as supportive as possible when I'm in that role. This was a great assignment, learning 3 different perspectives. I enjoyed it, and thanks for watching my video. Have a great one.